Welcome to Sleek Notes E-Commerce Boost Podcast, your chance to learn from the e-commerce experts so you can boost your business.
Hey guys! In this episode, we're going to talk about SEO. And in order to really figure out where Google is heading, I've interviewed the marketing scientist, Dr. Pete Meyers from Moz. He will share his expert knowledge so you'll stay up to date on the newest research and changes of SEO. Let's get started. Pete, welcome so much on this show. It's amazing to have you here.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Can you just start out by presenting yourself?
Yeah, so I work for Moz. We're a search marketing company out of Seattle, Washington, and we do SaaS software, essentially rank tracking, link tracking, and other software for organic search marketers. And I am the marketing scientist, which is a little bit of a vague, made-up title, I guess, where I work across the marketing and product teams to research where Google is headed and to apply that not only to our marketing and to share that information with the industry, but to try and inform where our product should be in the next couple of years.
Interesting. And before we get started, I'm a bit curious because I was reading about you, and on your About page on Moz, it says that you work on projects no one else understands. What does that mean?
I like to have the self-deprecating bios. So sometimes I joked once that about 1 in 3 of my projects actually pans out. So sometimes I don't even know exactly what I'm working on. But it's kind of pure data science in the sense that we explore things that Google might be doing and we play around with the data, and sometimes it goes somewhere and sometimes it doesn't. And Moz gives me that freedom to try things out because every once in a while something ends up being interesting. But sometimes I don't know myself where it's headed, so it's hard to explain to other people.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So today we'll talk about Google and its development and how SEOs can survive Google in the coming few years. Because just taking like a quick look at Google today, it's so much more competitive than it was 5 years ago, isn't it?
Absolutely, and it's just it seems like it's evolving so much more quickly now.
Yeah. And you said, I believe it was at a MozCon a few years ago, that 97% out of 100% of the SERPs does not have 10 blue links. That's incredible.
Yeah. No, that includes paid results, ads, and shopping. But even without that, just a massive number that have knowledge panels now and answers and videos and some kind of enhancement or some kind of add-on. And that's just exploding. And in mobile, it's virtually everything in mobile has some kind of enhancement or something that isn't that old school 10 blue links. And it was interesting because I think that was the first presentation where we had all sort of noticed these things. And I think in the back of our minds, because we think like search marketers, we just thought, well, that's the exception. Those things, sure, they're out there. Google's playing around, but it's 1 out of 100 or something. And we started to really measure that data. We have a daily data set we measure, and the numbers even a few years ago were just so much bigger than we would have expected, and started to really try and educate the search marketing world on this is happening. This isn't just some little toy Google's playing with. This isn't some fluke, but this is our new reality, and it's only gotten bigger since then.
Yeah, but why do you think it's gone this way? Do you know why it's become like this?
Part of the problem is essentially so many different searches have different intent. And I think Google finally realized that a search that has informational intent versus a search that has, say, commercial intent, just to make those two big buckets, they're very different and they call for a very different need. And Google also had a lot of problem dealing with kind of these really broad, ambiguous searches. If I go to Google with no history and I type Apple, do I want to eat an apple? Do I want to buy an iPhone? There's a company in the U.S. called Apple Vacations. Like, what am I trying to do? And they really tried to start to serve that need where just finding the site that matched Apple the best, that had a lot of links and seemed to be well respected, that didn't always fix the problem. And so they had to kind of understand intent, and they had to start throwing things out there like, well, we're going to bring back some organic results, but we're going to also put up this knowledge panel that tells you what an apple is, and we're going to put in some news about Apple, the company, and the latest iPhone. and we're going to put in some articles about Apple, the company, and we're going to kind of see what you click on and what you do and try to learn what you meant. A lot of this is trying to serve intent that Google doesn't always understand and trying to get us to tell them what we meant. And so you see the features evolve as Google tries to understand better what we're doing. The other side of it, though, is devices themselves. One of the big reasons we've seen Google push for answers is that we've gone from everything being on desktop and our screens getting bigger and bigger, and people have 24-inch monitors and they have 3 of them, to half of searches or more being run on our phones, and now to voice appliances like Google Home and Alexa, where we go from a giant screen to a tiny screen to no screen at all. And Google is trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? You can't read 10 links and 10 descriptions on a device, and you can't fit all that really on a mobile phone without a lot of scrolling and maybe, useless stuff for users. So how do they meet that world where searches can be happening across all kinds of screens or no screens at all? And so I think a lot of the push toward answers, whether it's the traditional knowledge graph or featured snippets, which we'll probably talk about a bit, has been dealing with this cross-device world. So it's a lot of things Google is trying to adapt to as we change and as technology changes.
Sure, interesting. And this obviously brings some challenges to SEOs. What does that mean if you're a search marketer?
I think the trick right now is it really depends on your niche. It used to be we could kind of give you this one-size-fits-all advice for, not to say that every market is the same, but if you were trying to get organic results and if it was 10 blue links, we were all kind of going after, we want to be relevant and we want to have strong links and we want to have authority and, we want to do these things. And now you see situations like the medical knowledge panels, for example. Google is creating this custom content. So if you type something like type 2 diabetes, you get this blue panel on the right on desktop, or on mobile, it takes up the whole screen, where they've created this custom content. And so if you're in this industry, this is an incredibly disruptive thing that's really affected your clicks and the impact, even if you're number one, the impact of your organic. And so I think the challenge right now for SEOs is really awareness. Like, what if you're in an informational kind of realm, or if you're in a realm where Google has really pushed hard into content like travel or the new jobs results in the past year, versus you're in a commercial world where there's a lot of shopping and there's a lot of different paid results. Our jobs are really diversifying a lot depending on what markets we're in and how much Google has pushed into those markets. So I think it means that some of the one-size-fits-all stuff and some of the thinking that we can just ignore this and do the same things we've always done, we really have to be very aware of the spaces we're in and what's happening, what Google's changing, and what's affecting us.
And how do you see the e-commerce industry in all of this?
I think it's tricky. I think Google is starting to segment a bit and say, certain things are just more commercial. If you type something like wedding dresses, you've got shopping results and you've got ads, and you might have 4 ads at the top, and you've got this SERP that's really dominated by paid search. And so at some point, I think we kind of have to make these decisions of, look, this is something that Google thinks is a commercial query, and if we want to be on it, we might have to pay for it. If we don't want to pay for it, we have to consider different paths and different searches and not going after these broad head terms. And to some extent, I think we need better awareness. We on the organic side, we can't look at searches like this and say, oh, well, all we do is organic, so we're just going to push your client to keep doing the things they do to rank well. We have to kind of go in and say, you know what, you're trying to rank for this thing that Google clearly sees as a commercial result, and you're going to have to think about, are you willing to pay for this? And what's it worth and what's the trade-off? And on the flip side, I think for paid, the same thing is happening in paid. It's not just AdWords ads anymore. Now we have paid shopping units. We have local pack ads now. We're publishing a study soon on that. So, you have that 3-pack of local results. Now you've got an ad at the top. You've got home services ads that Google's doing. So Google is diversifying that too. And so they're just realizing that these one-size-fits-all results don't really work, and they're trying to get into different verticals. If you're in a hotel, you've got that panel on the right, and you can book your room right in it, and there's these paid results sort of tied into that, which is a totally different kind of advertising than we had 3 or 4 years ago. So we just really have to be aware of what's going on in our industries.
Over the years, Google has added knowledge graphs, knowledge panels, and featured snippets in the search results. Is it problematic that Google uses automation in creating these? And the big question, are they stealing our data? Here's Pete's answer.
It can feel like that. Yeah. It's so there's been a shift. The knowledge graph in its kind of purest form originally were just these very specific sources, things like Wikipedia and CIA Factbook and such as that, and Freebase originally, and now a lot of it's based on Wikidata. But this was moderated content that Google had access to that kind of, they had some sort of partnership or some sort of relationship to use that content. And even though Wikidata obviously comes from many, many people, it's still sort of owned by them, and, it's a realm of data. And I think the problem Google ran into is that this curated data, it can never keep up with the pace of the web. That's never going to answer all of our questions. And so they launched featured snippets, which essentially were answers from all our websites. And instead of returning an organic result, trying to extract the answer and, give us some attribution, but put that answer right in the SERP. And so, I think that was a massive shift in ownership, where suddenly I think the arrangement had always been, look, we're going to give you our content as webmasters, as marketers, but you're going to send traffic back to our site. And now there's this shift of, now they're going to pull out that answer. And maybe if that answers the question, then people aren't going to click on that link. And we've seen it in local. It used to be that if you got a local pack result, you type something like pizza, and you got that pack result that went to your website. And then the link went to Google Maps, but you had a website link next to it. And now that website link is going away. And so now all of your local results, almost all of them, especially on mobile, are going into more Google results. And we're seeing more and more of that where Google is trying to keep you on Google and give you this in-SERP experience, and sometimes in very rich, compelling ways. So this original, not that we have a contract with Google, but this original arrangement in a sense that we'll give you our content if you give us traffic is shifting. And, that's a big deal. And we have to think about how we want to respond to that. And I think Google has to think about how they've changed that agreement in some ways.
Yeah. And as to the featured snippets, Google use automation in creating them, don't they? I know you think this is problematic. Why is that?
Well, it's tricky. I don't know if I'm not completely against it. I think Google's challenge is legitimate. They're trying to answer questions at the speed content's being produced, and they cannot do that with human curation. That has to be done with automation. That's just their reality. And so they're trying to use the entire index of all of our content. And they're trying to use automation not just to answer questions, but to understand what a question is in the first place. And it can be a little ambiguous. Things like if I type in something like Wi-Fi, Google is going to interpret that as what is Wi-Fi? They're going to sort of turn certain things into questions. And so they're trying to figure out what is a question and what is question intent, and then take our content and generate these answers. The trick is they're going to get it wrong, and they're going to mess up, and we can point to kind of these funny answers and these weird answers they came up with and laugh about it. But the reality is in the last 2 years, they've come very far. And it's a lot harder to find those kind of funny answers we can joke about. And they're getting more and more right. And so, I think it's not scary. The automation to me isn't scary in the sense that they're messing up and putting bad data out there. That sometimes is a problem. It sometimes can lead to a brand crisis or something like that. But I think the scarier problem is that they're actually getting better and better, and these answers are getting smarter. And what does that mean for our content when they can extract our content and understand it maybe better than we can? What happens to our site and what happens to the search journey?
Yeah, follow. But if it's all built on our site's data, surely there must be a way to take advantage of it.
Sure. So for now, there are cases where it's tricky. The local knowledge panels are a good example where Google is going to essentially return you to a Google result. And I think you have to decide, well, is that okay? If I'm a local business, do I mainly want website visitors, or do I want people to call me and come to my restaurant or come to my store? It's a little different thing. For organic, I think what we have right now is these answers are attributed. They do have a link back to us, and we control that content. So, I've been in situations where Google put up a bad answer from one of my sites, in some cases because my content was just a bad match to the question. It wasn't really their fault. And so I changed the content and I updated it, and I got a better answer and I got more clicks. And so, I think that's something we can do right now that hopefully, I think, isn't manipulative, but can be a win-win. We can put better answers out there. We can try to get Google to recognize those answers and display them. And I think the thing we have to be smart about is getting out of areas, and this happened with the original knowledge graph. When the knowledge graph started to expand, you'd start to get answers like, when is Mother's Day? And you had all these sites that's all they did, all these sites that just listed holidays for the next 5 years, so you could look up these dates, and that was useful. But when Google took that over, those sites had no value. If I ask when is Mother's Day and the answer comes up on the screen, I trust Google. I don't need any more information. I just want to put it on my calendar. Those sites just went away. And so I think we have to get out of the easy answers kind of market, and we have to get into things where that answer is going to be a teaser that leads people to read our content. They're going to want to click through. And we see that with how-to queries. We see that with recipes. If you ask for a recipe and you get 4 lines from the recipe in that answer box, nobody's going to try to make that recipe from the first 4 steps. That wouldn't turn out very well. And so they're going to click through and they're going to read your content. And that box, that answer can be really valuable. And so I think our job is not just to get into that snippet, to get into that box. Our job is to have the kind of content where that box will lead to clicks and conversions and not just replace us. Because if that one little answer, if that single sentence can replace us, then those are the areas we need to get out of, if we can.
Yeah, wow, that's really, really, really interesting. And you've also said that Google is becoming content creators. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so this is tough because it's getting more niche. So the medical knowledge panels I mentioned were one example. These are not knowledge panels in the sense that they go into Wikipedia and grab a paragraph about the disease. These are custom designed. They have symptom information. They have treatment information. They have custom images. So Google has gone out to this industry, in a sense, and custom created this content. On mobile, if you type in a recent movie, it used to be that you got a regular knowledge panel. Now you get this tabbed experience where you get a description of the movie. You can watch the movie if it's on Google Play. You can see the cast, and you're no longer going to the IMDb's of the world. They're creating this insert content that is, in this case, the case of the movies, it's aggregated in the sense it's other people's content, but it's a very compelling experience where maybe you don't need to go anywhere else. And we've seen that for weather and sports, and I'm a casual sports fan. What they have in that box, scores and the box score and the history and their schedule and maybe some videos, that's more than enough for me. And so we're seeing that more and more where Google is creating these content experiences that are incredibly disruptive for that industry. But I think the hard thing as marketers, to sit here and say, what should you do? Each of those things only affects a tiny percentage of search marketers or of businesses. And so, what you do really has to depend on what's happening to you in the SERPs today and what you're being affected by. So, if you're in sports, obviously that's incredibly disruptive. But for all the rest of us, if you sell cars, you might not care about that at all, and you have a completely different SERP landscape that's affecting you. And so, I think it's a lot harder for us in the marketing education industry, in a sense, to say, well, this is what you should do, because what you should do may vary radically depending on how far Google is pushed into your territory.
Right, okay. So the final question, just to bring that on, what do you then recommend e-commerces to do in order to keep up or at least stay on top on Google for the next 5 years? So if we just stay within the e-commerce niche.
Right. I think a mix. You're going to have to decide. You still have to rank. A massive amount of traffic still comes from Google. That's our reality. It's going to be our reality for a while. I think you have to consider both paid and organic, and you should not bury your head in the sand. Google's pushing hard into paid shopping. They see Amazon as a huge threat, and so Google is going to try and sell product through Google, and that's a reality we're going to have to deal with. And I think that's a reality e-commerce is going to increasingly deal with the next couple of years. I think there's a real value in exploring informational content that leads to a different phase of the funnel. I was doing some research just for fun on cheese plates, making selling a cheese platter with you might call it something different on your side of the pond, but just the party platter of various cheeses. And that's a commercial term. There are people trying to sell this and sell you cheese and sell you these pre-made plates. But then there was all this content around how do you make a cheese plate? And when I looked, what was interesting was it was people like Whole Foods, it was people like the grocery stores and the cheese shops that were ranking for this content that was essentially informational, but they saw a commercial opportunity. And so by getting you to read their article about how you make this thing, you went to their site and you're more likely to buy from them, and you're going to run over there and go, oh, they had some good ideas. I'm going to run over to Whole Foods and see what they have. And so I think there's a real opportunity for e-commerce providers of all sorts to really get into that informational content and see if they can grab people at other phases of the funnel, not right at that buy phase that they can get obsessed with. And I think the other thing is you have to think about those experiences in your site and your own user experience and what brings people back. Amazon, a massive number of product searches come through Amazon. They care whether they rank, but they know you're going to go straight to them. And so, as e-commerce sites, we have to do two things. First of all, we have to be aware of that. When does Amazon become the search engine that we're trying to optimize for instead of Google? What is the commercial? When is Alibaba going to hit the Western market in a way that we have to be aware of them? But we also have to think about what's that experience where if I'm looking for a product and I go straight to Amazon, how can you do that? If I'm a loyal customer, what gets me to come straight to your site instead of always going through Google? And, that's something we're going to have to fight for in the next few years is how do we get people to come straight back to us and think of us as a primary source and not always find the products through search?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your really, really cool input, Pete.
Yeah, nice talking to you.
And you. That's all from Ecommerce Boost this time round. Are you lost for ideas on how to grow your business? You're in luck. If you give this podcast a 5-star rating and send me a screenshot of that to jf@sleeknote.com, you'll get a list packed with growth ideas, all ranked based on difficulty, impact, and time. My emails is in the show notes as well, and I promise it'll be worth it. Cheers!
This session of E-Commerce Boost was produced by Sleeknote. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on tactics and strategies that'll help boost your e-commerce.